Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final Local History Guild for the year 2021. It's going to be a good one tonight. We're talking about redevelopment and historic preservation in the city of New Bedford. Big change in the 20th century. My name is Mike Dyer. I'm the curator of maritime history here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. We've got a great round of panelists, people with direct experience in this topic, and people with a great deal of interest in the topic. We got Jennifer Smith. You can wave, Jen. There's Jen. And Dave Kennedy. Hello, David. And there's Joan. Hi, Joan. And to my left is Bill DeCarmo. There he is. So this whole program, well, this particular program started at a conversation. Jen was coming back, getting her lunch, and I was on my way to Carter's to buy a pair of socks or something. I forget what it was. we ran into each other on the street. We were talking a bit about, I told her that we had acquired the Chamber of Commerce records here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and Jen was very interested in that, and had told me that you wrote a master's thesis on this subject. Is that right, Jen?
I did, Mike. 17 years ago, I realized.
Oh, it's been that long.
In 2004. Yeah. So yeah, hi everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. So as Mike said, the idea for this presentation germinated not too long ago, and over the summer when we were walking down William Street. But my entree and sort of interest into the story of urban renewal in New Bedford really started in the early 70s. So I was a little kid in like 71. I was like 6-7 years old. And, we were a little more free range those days. And my sister and brother and I could go to the bottom of Pearl Street and play in the construction area that was, I didn't know this, but it was the creation of the link between the South Terminal Urban Renewal Project and the 195 Urban Renewal Project. And I remembered thinking, what happened to the people who lived here? And what happened to the streets that we would drive down on the way to the North End to go get my shoes at like Champagne shoe store, right on the avenue. And so that was then. So fast forward to 2004, and I've got an opportunity to write a master's thesis for my community planning master's program. And I thought, what should I do this on? What's going to mean something to me? I want to do something that contributes to the scholarship of something and means something to me. And at the time, I was very fortunate to have as a mentor and a very, very good friend, Mr. David Kennedy, who's joined us this evening as well. And so I took the opportunity to bounce that off David and said, hey, planning, let's talk planning. Let's sort of geek out on this. And I can write something about a planning aspect of New Bedford. And he said, what about urban renewal? What about, and I literally went right back to being that 6-year-old kid and thinking about the changing landscape of New Bedford. And so that really was what got me going on this path, Mike. And I guess I'll just say, by way of introduction to my work, again, I was doing a master's in community planning. And so my interest is in citizen participation in planning. And I wanted to know what that looked like. And in my first dive into the topic of urban renewal and finding out how it was created as a program, it was very early on that I realized that citizen participation was a brand new concept, but it was something that was inherent in the law that created the urban renewal program. And so I had to come up with a thesis. And my thesis was that they didn't do citizen participation as fully as they probably should have. And what I'll leave you with is be careful what you start going to look for, because I uncovered at least the answer to that question and so much more about the social history of this particular urban renewal project down in South Terminal.
Yeah,
we can talk
Joe,
about.
we're gonna we'll circle back. We'll circle back to you here by and by. But you said something that reminds me, immediately of the conversation I had recently with Joan Beaubian as we were, discussing this program, and you said changing landscape, and that strikes a chord immediately with the conversation that I had with Joan, where she was telling the story of how she witnessed that change. What were you talking about, Joan? You left and came
Oh,
back, is that right?
yeah, I left. I came back. I was born and raised here on Cedar North Street. And when I left, I was happy to leave because I was a kid who was ready to go on an adventure. But when I came back, what I thought I was going to see was the old New Bedford. And I got downtown. I didn't know where I was. I think that one time I came on a bus and the man said to me, aren't you supposed to get off in New Bedford? I said, yes. He said, well, this is New Bedford. Well, that was when the terminal was across from the post office, and that was all there was. The terminal
When would that
was,
have been, Joan? What year? What
oh,
era
I
are
don't
you
know,
talking?
in the 1971, 2, somewhere around there. I'm not sure.
When did
Maybe
you
later.
leave?
I'm not sure. But I'll
When
tell you
did
one
you
thing.
leave?
Huh?
When did you leave the city?
1960.
You left in 1960 and came
Yeah,
back.
and
in
I came back to
Bedford.
visit a couple of times. One time on the bus. That's the story I'm telling now, is that I had no idea where it was. Everything was gone, and the bus terminal was a trailer, and there was absolutely nothing downtown. I had no clue where I was, and that was sad. And then I happened to go to where my parents were living then, a new house, and everything was new to me, basically. And I realized that no longer could I stand on the corner of Kempton and Cedar Street at the old canteen and meet all of my friends. I had to go to their homes. Most of them now no longer lived in New Bedford, no longer lived in the West End. There was no longer my community. I was devastated. Even though I wanted to leave it, you can understand that. But as a kid, when I came back and found out that it was no longer there, it was devastating.
Well, what do you remember? What do you remember? Sort of as highlights of, like, what sticks in your mind as the texture of New Bedford when you were
when I was a kid.
You were
Oh my
young.
goodness. Yeah, you could go anywhere because everyone in the neighborhood knew you. So you were safe. And everybody knew that you knew that if you did something wrong, it was going to get back to your mother faster than you could. And but it was just community. Every family knew every family. It was wonderful. There was stores up and down Kempton Street. There were grocery stores, fish markets, electric stores. Anything you wanted, you could stay in your neighborhood and buy it. There was a hairdresser. There was a barbershop, the pool shop, the pool hall, I guess they called it, huh? Restaurants. The Busy Bee restaurant was there. There were bakeries, big bakeries. Richmond's Bakery, Table Talk Bakery was there. That wasn't called Table Talk at the time, I don't think. But there was 5 churches. We had the Baptist Church, the Zion Church, did I say Bethel AME Church, and the Union Baptist Church, and the Orthodox Church. And all of them, we visited all of them, and we all have services, in each other's churches. And then we dated Daddy Grace, of course. I can't forget that. That was like.
You're approaching this really from a very sort of personal, family,
Absolutely.
community
Absolutely.
perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very.
Which is why we have the West End reunion like every 2 or 3 years. We had it starting in the early 80s. That was when all of the old folks were around. And I think I told you, my sister did the favor for that. She did bookmarks that she did in calligraphy and put all of the names of the families in the West End. And there were so many names, the people that are no longer here anymore. And of course, the young people will never know them because their families have dispersed. Some of them just left New Bedford, And so, yeah, totally personal. I take it personally, even though we moved to a better house, don't get me wrong, we went from a house. The house that I lived in is the house that Harriet Tubman was sequestered in during the raid on Harper's Ferry. And that was all well and good, but that's how old it looked. That's how old it felt. So then when I came home and they were living in a house that used to belong to a doctor, I was like, oh, well, we've really moved up. However, in order to see your friends, it was no longer just being able to go up on the corner and wait for them. We could stand on the corner. They said, if you stand on the corner of Kempton and Cedar Street, eventually you're going to see who you want to see. Everybody passed by there every day.
Now, as I was going through the records, of the Chamber of Commerce, now keeping in mind, of course, that the Chamber of Commerce has its own agenda, and that is, to further the economic development. And there's a lot of baggage associated with economic development from a historic preservation point of view, and obviously, as you described, from a community point of view. But let me read you what this a reporter from the Standard Times was describing the North Terminal project in 1971. He called it a city within a city, out of the blight and decay of what now constitutes a major segment of New Bedford's stagnated core business district. Now, that's a pretty excoriating kind of an assessment, of the core of the central business district. And he's probably also talking a great deal about the waterfront there. Mr. Kennedy, what's your position on on this kind of on what happened and where we're going now and where we were?
Well, I'm being brought into this probably as just the human being, not from my prior city government experience, but I started in planning in 1974. So I was quite a considerable distance afar from the main urban renewal projects, although I lived in New Bedford all my life. So I did witness when they all came about. When I first, my first indication, I used to work in the J.C. Rhodes Eyelet factory right down on the waterfront. And that was, I was in the engineering division at the time. And I had just come back for a summer from UMass Amherst. And things were starting to boil down there. The fish houses were getting overcrowded. The buildings were starting to go into a downslide, although not many people gave much thought to how historically significant and architecturally beautiful they were, made of cut granite and all. But what was happening was there was a need for the fishing industry was starting to flex more muscle than it really had the opportunity to flex within. And the buildings down there now started to come under scrutiny. The big building that I was working out of J.C. Rhodes was a 4-story brick building, and it was slated for demolition. And right next to it was the New Bedford Storage Warehouse, also slated for demolition. I couldn't figure out how all this was going to happen, although we had just witnessed most of the North Terminal being demolished to make way for the parts of Route 18 connecting to 195. So shouldn't have come as a big surprise, but nonetheless, we were wondering how it was all going to happen. And we were already making plans within the J.C. Rhodes company to go up and move into the industrial park in the north end. And that was quite welcome, getting out of a 4-story brick building that was built in the 1830s, making only one product, that was shoe eyelets. How can you make a living on that, right? Until you're putting them in boots for all the combat servicemen that we had at the time. So it was it's a period that I was starting to witness coming, to fruition, that the downtown was forever going to change, and the fish houses were going to be either exterminated, or they were going to move to an area that was going to accommodate them and get travel to them back and forth much easier. But fast forward from that point, I went into the Army, and I was away from New Bedford for 3 years. And when I came back, it was an entirely, like Joan said, it was an entirely different place. The construction was well under, the deconstruction had already occurred. The reconstruction was underway. We had a North Terminal project that was built in the probably maybe around 66. It was the first urban renewal endeavor in the city, and nothing happened there. It was, if I remember, Billy remembers, it was a dock for 2 ferry boats from Stamford, Connecticut at the time, and there that was for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, nothing on probably 100 some odd acres of reclaimed land and bulkhead, waiting for opportunity. And then we went into, Jen's, focus area, the South Terminal. And I never really understood until I read Jen's thesis how hurtful that was to some folks, and how it just yanked that, yanked their ancestry, right out of play. And and it was done, mainly for the fishing industry, so that it could expand and keep that continuity in the city of New Bedford and make it strong economically. And then again, where did all the people go? Well, a lot of them, as Billy remembers, a lot of them were when 195 first came into being, the section that ran through New Bedford, it was around 1960, and it took a score of 3 tenement buildings around Summer Street, Penniman Street, and those folks, they moved, and the first subdivision was created in the north end of New Bedford, was Pine Hill Acres, and it was then Briarwood was created. But those were single family homes to take some of those displaced folks. They were the lucky ones. When it came to the West End urban renewal, they were more or less put back into the same context of the neighborhood with King Village, Bedford Towers, and everything seemed to be going pretty well. We were displacing folks, but yet we were finding suitable and better housing for them. Except when you went to places like Eddie Harrington, built up in Evergreen Park, where you had 5-bedroom apartments above 5-bedroom apartments with wooden stairways going up, and hundreds of kids. And it just set the tempers on fire. And urban renewal at that point started to get a very, very bad reputation, because there was I don't think there was that level of planning. I've looked at all the planning documents. We've written a master plan from 1908. Well, the first master plan done in the city of Bedford, when the planning department was formed in 1960, there was one done with federal government money, and that master plan was for 1980. Did they accomplish much from that? The urban renewal, I think, was a bust at that time. But no, maybe we just keep the discussion going. I'll fill back in a moment.
Well, that leads into Bill DeCarmo's sort of position, where in our early conversations, he said that this change really started at a much earlier period than we sort of generally think, which from my point of view, as a historian spending a lot of time looking at historical photographs and trying to put together, the history of the waterfront, it was in constant state of change. And it's very difficult to sort of date things because buildings were, continually being knocked down and new buildings put up. So what did you see? What did you see in all of this, Bill?
What I saw taking place during this period, which happened to be the president of the local NAACP, was the city going through some large-scale developments that required specialists really to take in hand in order to accomplish it. However, our local politicians, unfortunately, made the mistake, in my opinion, of going outside of New Bedford to get people to come into New Bedford and tell us how we should change the city landscape, which I was opposed to, because I felt we had the competency here locally of engineers, architects, and people that could have completed this project. But underlying all that, you had to look a little further to find out what was really developing around us. There were a group of men, very few women, involved in a conspiracy on how they wanted things to work out so that it became self-serving to them. And so a lot of people aren't aware of some of these things that were taking place because they were caught up with the, the fantasy and the demolition and all these other bits of excitement that would go on. But in the meantime, we were destroying our communities, both in the West End and the South End and the North End, the business community, the residential communities, and destroying architectural buildings that we should never build because they would last as long as the pyramids. That's how great buildings built strictly of all granite, which would be everlasting. We sort of allowed nefarious characters to step in and try to run things the way they taught it. And the only way they would deal with people was to get out of town people that we didn't know, but they knew, to underhandedly work with them, in my opinion, in many criminal ways. But it was hidden and protected. Of course, I know all the characters that were involved. And this is why eventually I ended up leaving the authority, because when they tried to bring me into their fold, I said, nope, I don't want any part of it. But anyways, that's another issue that should.
Let me ask you something. Was that the downtown idea exchange? Do you know what this is in the Chamber of Commerce records? Was this downtown idea exchange, a nationally organized group headquartered in New York, dedicated to enabling the restorations of downtown areas across the country? Is that sort of what you're talking about?
They were involved. What I did is that, I have to step back a bit. I was asked by the Labor Department to take on a program, one of the first programs of training specifically undereducated and people that needed jobs, basically men, to train them in the construction industry phases, even the basics of building homes and stuff like that. It was called Operation Mainstream. So I was the director of that program for a couple of years. And from that, I went on to be concentrated employment program. These were all programs to try to get the kids off the street, get them something so that they could take care of their families and so forth. But in the meantime, Mayor Harrington at the time asked me if I would become the director of the West End Urban Renewal. And I laid out my plans to him. I said, if you're going to do that, I said, I'm going to step up. I want 10 acres of just land here that's laid out here that belongs to the rope factory, Whaley City Rope Factory. I said, that's going to be set aside for the United Front Housing, which is an organization I started while I was wearing the hat of the NAACP president and the project director of that project. I was holding 3 projects, like the 3 titles, all simultaneously, and getting these things done. Now, I was perhaps one of the most vociferous leaders in this community in bringing forth the problems that existed and how we were adrift. However, on the other side, on the flip side, we had other characters that were involved in this renewal stuff, made up of attorneys, doctors, some engineers, and some other people that had the devil sitting on one shoulder and the angels on the other side. But they were outright thieves. And I told them that to their face. I didn't play with any of them. And I still have the names all, unfortunately, they're all dead right now, which is a good thing. But they screwed this city up so bad that I left with a bad taste. I just resigned. I said, no, this is because I couldn't win the thing, because then I had the community turning on me. I said, here, I'm helping. After I ended up building the NAACP building without a mortgage, completely paid for by people like the Ottaway family, Dick Young from the Titleist Company, Gus Stady and a lot of bankers, other people that I rallied around and got them to understand what was going on, and they participated in funding that entire building, which is still standing today and is being used as a community building like it was intended. But the thing that irked me was the planning. David, I don't think had been in his position at that time, but he was coming on, I think. But we had a local planning department that could have done a better job had they been left to do the job, but they were steered off in a different direction and backed off and told what they could do, what they can't do in a very political way. And so Dave was one of the best planners we ever had in the city.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, David. As a planner of the city, I'd like to pivot this conversation a little bit toward the work that Joan and Jen actually do, which is a little bit sort of parallel to my work here at the Whaling Museum. But Joan, let's face it, that this is now a national historical park. That's got to be good for something. I mean, this is federal recognition of the significance of the place, which is all well and good.
So Mike,
Yeah.
I just want to jump in on that. And there's just so many touch points here. So the boundary of the National Historical Park is the local historic district, right? It's bounded by Cushing Avenue, Elm, Union, and Route 18. If I could have called my thesis anything different than what I did, the long title, it would have been The Path of Least Resistance. This is a story of power. I'm just going to throw it out there. Supremacy, white supremacy, structural racism. Let's just call this what it is. There was a lot of money floating around here. And when the original highway design was to go, this story, everybody on this screen knows this story. When the original highway design was to go right by the Whaling Museum and what is now the National Park Visitor Center, the prominent, mostly white families of New Bedford stood up and said, oh, hell no, that's not going to happen. You can go around us, and whatever happens south of here, it's probably not deserved, but that's where you're going to find the slums. That's where you're going to find the blight and be able to work your program. You read a quote, Mike, from the Chamber of Commerce, and my snarky response to that is, well, isn't that convenient? So you've already declared the business area slummed and blighted. You've already said that these people don't even have a pot to pee in. So literally in some instances, so you've already established that they fit the criteria for some slum clearance.
Yeah.
Right, Joan? So I just want to, go for it.
They
You take it from here, Joan.
Yeah, I mean, they really did. They split the communities apart, and racially they divided all of us. We all had to go to areas that we weren't familiar with. I mean, not that that's a bad thing, but our neighborhood was mainly the West End, the old West End, as I call it. It was mainly people. There were some Italians, but there were mainly people of color. There were African Americans, American Indians, Cape Verdeans, West Indians, but that didn't seem to matter to people. It was like, they didn't think about the people. I don't even know what they were planning on doing with the West End. They surely didn't do anything with it. They took all the houses down, and because of Bill and people like him, they ended up with United Front, which was the only solution really at that time. But what did they do besides that? They just took all those houses, that some of them were really nice houses. I have photographs that Mr. Kennedy gave to Jackie Hallsmith, and I had cataloged them with the names of the families that lived in there. And some of those houses were well taken care of. They were nice looking houses. And with a little rehab, those houses could have lost the test of time. There were some very lovely homes that now I see houses that are being rehabbed in other areas of the city. And I realize our area could have looked like that too. Really could have.
Joan, I found that with the South Terminal project as well. I did a sample of 100 properties. There were over 300 properties that were demolished in the South Terminal project. And I looked at a sample of 100 of them, and I did an analysis on what they were looking at, toilets, bathrooms, heat, running water, stuff like that. And granted, yes, there were properties down there that didn't have any of that stuff. But
Right.
what I ended up really coming up with was about 30% of that sample of 100. So 30% could have been very, very little financial investment brought up to code, no problem.
Absolutely.
And it's easy for us, right, to look back and be critical about what that program did and how it worked, but they weren't trying to do that. They just weren't trying to do that. And Mr. Carmo, I just do want to mention that I always found it fascinating. Once I started digging in, and what I was digging into were the records of the New Bedford Redevelopment Authority. And so these were the folks that were literally showing up on people's doorsteps and saying, hey, so we're going to come in and we're going to do some work in this neighborhood. We want to buy your house. And I literally saw formal documents that people signed with an X, because I'm guessing they were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, not everybody, but they didn't even understand that when they gave them $1, they literally showed up with $1 and said, here's $1 for consideration. And that was a contract. And these people didn't even know that.
Very interesting point.
Go ahead, please.
Very interesting point. That this is what I mentioned earlier, that, about the hiring of contractors, of businesses from out of New Bedford. These were the people that were subversive in doing a lot of these things. I fought them and had them turn around. They were doing appraisals and other things like that. They were undermining the poor owners of property. They weren't being paid properly. And yet people in the authority that had the power to make changes refused to do it unless they were getting something under the table. They were outright thieves, but there was, that was the way they operated, all the way to the corner office in City Hall. That's how bad it was.
So I'm going to ask you, what did they promise the people in the West End? Just another house? People were given a chance to move out of the neighborhood into a new home, huh?
Joan, let me explain to you. This is how they went into the West End when I was the director. And this is how I fought with the mayor and some other people in the authority.
I know exactly who you know. Yeah.
We set the West End up, the Bedford Village housing that's there now.
Yes.
That was supposed to be owned by the NAACP as a community, housing. The Connie Academy, I named the Connie Academy. They didn't like it. I had to take on the entire school committee and hold them in hostage in the old cook school, and got them to vote right there. Doctor, I'm trying to think of his name there, hated me for it because I would have came and I said, you guys aren't leaving this building until you vote. And I had the building was loaded with people. They were a big turnout. So they finally, and Rosemary Tierney, who became mayor later, she was opposed to it. She says, we're not doing it. You can't make us do it. I said, well, you're not leaving this building. And we kept them there as hostages. And they ended up voting for it, renaming the school, appointing someone for the principal of it. And I named the person Bert Waters. Dr. Waters, who had all the credentials. And there were so many things, that were all the doctors we had living in the West End. We had over 26 minority businesses that we don't have today.
That's right. That's right.
It was awful. That whole
That's right.
stores, funeral parlors, the hairdressers, and all doctors, Dr. Dave,
There were
MIT graduate.
Yeah, there were quite a few doctors. There were you didn't have to leave your community to see a doctor.
As a sweeper, as a doctor, the St. Luke's Hospital wouldn't allow any people of minority to be doctors in their hospital. I went there and raised hell with them. They changed that policy. I got them to change that and get a couple of doctors put in there. They didn't like it, but they did. When I got sick, they gave me the presidential suite in the St. Luke's Hospital.
Hey, we,
No,
we have-
things have changed because my brother left New Bedford because he could not get a job here in at the time.
Well, Attorney George Layton couldn't get a job here. He ended up, going to Chicago to work and became a federal judge and all these other things.
Right.
We took away, more minorities were turned away from the city that had MIT degrees and all these high
Yes.
degrees. They couldn't get a job. Not even in City Hall. The only one in City Hall was Bill Dade. They're not Dade, I mean, what's his name? But he was the only person. The Static Times only had Darcy White as an employee. We turned that around.
Trish Andrade, who's in the audience,
She's an old West End
posted a comment.
family.
She says, I lived on Middle Street during the times of the race riots in New Bedford. We haven't touched on yet. It is clear to me that the urban renewal project was a deliberate program to displace the people of color in New Bedford. Excuse me, both in the South End and West End areas. There was a real fear that the Black Panthers and energized people of color would make demands on the city leaders. So this really does sound like quite a dynamic narrative you all are outlining, here. This is a different sort of direction that the conversation's taken from somebody like, me, who's completely unaware of this sort of conversation. So this is very, very interesting.
Oh, I thought you knew this before we went into it.
Well,
This is how
no,
it's-
I'm a whaling guy, and so I'm sitting in my office lamenting the fact that the Roach Counting House is no longer there. From my point of view, that should be a National Historic Landmark, and we should have built a
Absolutely.
damn highway around it.
Right.
But at any rate, I could see that there is, as Jen surmised some weeks back, a much larger conversation here.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think about just the general approach here. So how do you, you disperse, right? You've got a community, a fabric, potentially those folks have opinions and might coalesce and might come together to sort of push back on this. So we need to figure out how to break that up a little bit. The other thing I wanted to mention is, I went in looking at citizen participation, and the answer to that question was there were 2 meetings for the South Terminal Urban Renewal Project. All the pictures have all old white guys with hats on and suits, and all of the transcripts from those 2 meetings basically said that they showed up. They had some nice boards that showed maps and some little pictures. And they said, you like this, right? This will be okay. And left. Like they didn't say, let's have some input. Let's get some let's engage here. It was something that they had to check the box. And so it was nothing. It really was nothing. But I want to talk about where my research led me, and it's exactly what Mr. Carmo and my good friend Joan Beaubian are talking about. It's who were these people on both sides of this, right? And so I decided to interview both the director of the New Bedford Redevelopment Authority and the deputy director. So fortunate that those folks were alive and able to talk to me in 2004. They're both gone. The director of the Redevelopment Authority at the time, and this speaks, I think, a little bit to some of what you're saying, Mr. Carmo, was Howard Baptiste. And what Howard told me was, he said, I believed so, I'm paraphrasing because David has my copy of the thesis, but he basically said, I believed so deeply in this program, hell, I moved my own mother twice. That's what he told me. And I said, okay. And then I went to Henry Horn, the second in command, and Henry Horn said, well, of course it was about the fishing industry. Of course we had to support the fishing industry. Were there costs to that? Was there collateral damage? Of course there was. But we had to support the industry that was going to put New Bedford on the map. Then I talked to people like, I think his name was Antonio Costa. And he got up at a public meeting and he literally said, this is my house. This is my apple tree. This is my view of the water. This is where I fish. This is my well where I get my drinking water. This is home to me. You can't just take this from me. And that man fought back to the very last second. And he fought the government and who was coming to try to take his home for a freaking dollar. It wasn't exactly a dollar, but that's the other piece of the story. And I'll certainly stop here. But the other piece of the story is once you establish the value of a property, and then every subsequent property is fair market value, but you've set that first one pretty darn low, these people got nothing for their homes. They got nothing because fair market value of nothing is nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it just set up this system of oppression and a system of business against humans. And we see what's happened. We see what's happened.
Some got more than others, but yeah. And there were houses that were owned by certain people that you can see as you go through our community, it's just like a tooth missing and from some of the blocks, and they were all owned by same people, you know? So that's why it led me when I came home to, I was kind of suspicious. I was like, whoa, how come they took that house? And they didn't take this one, you know? And yeah, and then the houses up and down Ash Street that were so in good shape. They took the good houses and I just couldn't believe it as I walked the streets. I didn't know where it was half the time, you know, but I went around and I came to, I just surmised the same thing. They just wanted us out. They didn't want us as a group here anymore. There were too many homes that were starting to boil and too many ideas were coming out of some of these houses, you know. I guess they said, we have to do something about this. Let's get rid of it. Get rid of the whole.
Peggy Medeiros says back in those days, no one was asked for input. Businessmen tended to line up and approved of what was presented. I remember my dad going to all kinds of business meetings when he worked at Aerovox. Everyone was expected to be positive and things would work out.
Oh yeah, they put the brushstroke on it because even my mother and father, they were all for it. Let's face it, they were going into a new home, you know, and they were all for it. And I was like, oh boy, if I said sometimes I have to blame myself. I wasn't here. I wasn't one of those that stood up. And would I have stood up if I was here? Would I have been one of those that would have taken that dollar and said, and you're going to sign for me to get a mortgage on a new house? Okay, I'll take it. Would I have been one of those? Maybe, because you know, you don't think of your community being decimated until it's finished, until everything is over, and then you look back at it, and there's nobody there. You know,
Joan, you know where the strength was in the West End, especially as the women had the strength of leadership, and the fellows, for some reason or other, just didn't stand up to what.
oh wow,
You know, but the women all did. The women,
yeah,
as the head of the NAACP, it was the women whose backs that I was riding on, because they all supported me so well, and that's how we got so much accomplished in that whole entire area.
yeah.
Was because of the females that stood together.
And that building was a plus for the community, you know, that was a plus.
There's so much history there that has not been touched on yet, including the Black Panthers, who I got a headquarters for them in the West End to try to, you know, maintain them and make them understand that you don't go about making changes the way you wanted to do it.
You don't burn your own community down.
Right. But look at how how you know some of the buildings were burnt, like there, you know, the Masons who had lost all
That's
their.
the sad thing. The Masons building was, yeah,
Remember we had a library in the West End. In
Sure.
the police station. We had
Yeah.
a separate police station.
and there was a youth center upstairs. That's the building I was talking about, that all you had to do was stand there. They had the steps on both sides, Cedar Street and Kempton Street. All you had to do was stand there. That was Command Central
That's right.
for all the kids in the West End.
Yeah, Pontiac dealerships, one on Elm Street, one on Kempton Street.
A Nash dealership.
People talk pie, industry was there. We had
Yep.
so much history that still hasn't been told, you know.
You
but-
have to remember too that there are so many rooming houses that housed the immigrants when they came from the West Indies, you know? Those are stories that well, of course, Catherine Grover in her book, The Fugitives Gibraltar, talked about the West End of New Bedford and its history. That's how we got started, really, really digging deeper. And boy, did we lose a lot of history when they tore down those houses.
It's
But
awful.
yeah,
You remember, you were on the Historic Commission, is that right, John?
I was on the Historic Commission, but I also am the co-founder of the New Bedford Historical Society. And we were dealing with just that history, the history of people of color of New Bedford, because Jackie Hallsmith, who came back from Boston and in the same situation I was in, she said, oh, we can't let this go without talking about it. So we started the Historical Society mainly to pull us not just back together again socially, but back together again historically, so that we would have a record of all of the people that lived in that neighborhood and those who came before us, and how we found out how important that West End really was. I mean, you know, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and you name it, the history's there. And one of the houses have been destroyed. But the physical part has been destroyed, not the emotional part. At one time I said that they tore a community apart. And I said, after, when you go to one of the West End reunions, you realize it almost brought us closer together, because we still fight for each other. We're in each other's lives. So they
So
could try to, you know, but we won the war.
And one of the important things, if you recall, is that we didn't have any racial division.
Never.
Everybody loved each other.
Never.
Whether you're white, black, or whatever, we all loved
Yep.
each other, worked together, kids and adults.
When I was in high school, I was senior, the class secretary. Martin Gomes, who was Cape Verdean, was the president. Yan Suhu, Chinese, obviously, was treasurer. And Joan Martin, who was Portuguese, was the vice president. Now, you would, if you saw that nowadays, it would be on the cover of People magazine. That's so unusual. We never thought a thing of it. Not a thing. In those days, that was 1959. Never thought that was unusual, that we had that much.
Oh, right.
All in New Bedford. No one ever thought about color. I know we didn't. Everybody said, oh, Joan, they must. Well,
Right.
let me say this. The powers that be did, but the kids didn't. You know, we never even put it in. We had friends of every strata, no racial divide there.
And the South End the same way, South Terminal area. The community, Water Street was mostly all Jewish businesses. And the minorities that lived there all got together with the Jewish people there. They had a time. They lived next to each other. It was just beautiful. You didn't have any racial divisions and such. I can understand, you know, after later on, is when I went in the military, when I first
You found out, yeah.
racial problems. Yeah,
But there was no Jim Crow here.
yeah, right.
So David, I know you
That we knew
remember,
of, it had to be here. We just didn't see it.
right, right.
Maybe
And
we were very naive, apparently.
I just wanted to say to David and bring him into this conversation, because I think it's part of the larger sort of story here is when I first started talking to David about doing the research and really digging in, I said, well, where do you find all the stuff? Is it at the library? Does the planning department have this? And he's like, well, it's all over the place. And, you know, I think some of it is over at the old Voc where they moved some files when whatever municipal building got taken down or whatever. And I, you know, looking back on that, I really feel like that was just a continued erasure of what happened. This was a huge part of this is a huge part of New Bedford's history. Tons and tons, lots of money was going through this. People's lives were changed, yet I was sifting through piles of files from the redevelopment authority on the floor of the old vocational school. I didn't understand that. And so I think one of the things I would love to see is I want to celebrate the resistors. I have access to documents that show people resisted this and they had good reason to. I want to think about how there's a comment in the chat right now about learning from this in big projects like the rail project. How do we do that? How do we not make the same mistakes again? And how do we honor the people who lived through these life-changing projects here?
And we're losing the people that were involved in it because we ignored them. There's one woman that I've been chasing, but she's been ignoring me, who's a writer, to do some of these things. But for some
Well,
reason,
Bill, you just happened to hit on something. I had started putting a book together with the photographs that I have from the Urban Renewal. And I got to get permission to use them. But, and we'll put each family, that the last family that lived there, I'm collecting their photographs to go along with the house photographs and their stories. And of course, there are some people whose houses we don't have pictures of who would love to tell their story for this book. And I approached Spinner. They're doing one, but they're doing one for the whole city. I want to do one that's so personal, so for the people that were affected,
Right.
and let them tell the story. I think that's my way of my avenue to get to these
what
folks.
disturbs me is that there were a lot of people like the Jordan family.
Oh
you know,
yeah, they're
dentists,
gone.
the Dr. Days, MIT. I mean, all these highly educated people were pushed out of the city. I
They're
said,
gone.
it's wrong, you know?
But I
Terrible.
have a list. I do have a list of everybody, all
Yeah.
those names that we can include in part of our remembering of them. As soon as I can get the list together, I thought I was going to have it for you for tonight, but I don't. And I will see to it that you get it, because those are the people that have to be remembered. Yeah, you're right.
I remember the 26 stories, the people that I dug up information that were minority, 100% minority owned businesses.
The Onlys. Look at
Yeah.
the Only family. They're two barbers and a funeral director. You know, there were other businesses too. I mean,
It was the same way.
the Busy Bee restaurant
Yeah.
that was on the corner right where the NAACP is now. That was the Busy Bee restaurant. That was I was a little girl, and that was when that was.
While I was the director of Western Urban Renewal, every Sunday I used to meet with Eddie Harrington, who was the mayor, in his office with a bottle of Doors, because he loved Doors. We'd sit down for at least an hour and a half while he's zipping his whiskey. And I told him what I wanted. And he says, you can have what you want, Bill. You know what I did? I told him, I'm going to be appointed to the airport commission because I'm a pilot. And I'm going to hire a new director there. And so you know who applied for the job? Izzy Eisner, who got fired from he got fired from Aerofox, okay? Now the airport commissioner didn't want to hire him because he's Jewish. I said, I don't give a damn. He's the man. We hired him. He stayed there, the most successful manager the airport's ever had.
The power of Scotch.
Stories like this. For the housing authority, we had no minorities at all in the housing authority. I got Tony Cruz, the chairman of the housing authority, first black. We just had to break down all these barriers, but you had to be forceful enough to do it. You know, and you have to find ways to do it. But we accomplished these things here until I left. Then it started, numbers of activities started to slow down. But I was the one that, I guess I was stirring up the pot. And so they were getting upset with me, and I was already upset with them.
Yeah, Mike, one thing they mentioned the riot. I wasn't here for the riot, but that was one of the very first, that was the impetus, I believe,
Hillary Clinton came down with it, because I was in the midst of that. I brought Ed Brooks in the city, brought all of our national figures into the city to help to get more money. But even as the money came in, the politicians, the political people that were involved in things, the money went elsewhere to other directions.
Hmm.
So they diverted it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been quite the enlightening conversation, and it sounds to me like it could go on for probably the
Days.
foreseeable future, a long time. And you know, I think we might want to think about what we talked about tonight and maybe revisit this conversation down the road. What do you think, Jen, David, Joan? Is this something that you'd like to continue to chat about, maybe push it in different directions, like what Trish is raising here as New Bedford sets up for the rail project? What kinds of lessons do we need to remember? And it sounds like
Yes.
there's a lot of lessons that we need to remember, things we need to think about what's valuable to the community, what's beneficial, because it's certainly not it's a two-way street, obviously. You got to take care of the people, and you got to, but the city has to thrive at the same time. Any last words, Mr. Kennedy, before we sign off?
I think if anything we've learned, I'm trained to look forward. That's my profession. Looking behind, it's a wonderful thing if you learn from it. I'm not sure we have in terms of urban renewal, but I think the only way we're going to proceed now, and we've had several mini urban renewal plans unfolded in the last 2 decades. I was involved in 2 of them, one of them up in the north end, 2 of them in the north end, actually. And I think we've seen that there was never neighborhood participation before. And we've instilled that in all of our planning programs, at least, that there is a strong component of neighborhood participation. It does craft the end result. It always crafts the end result, we'll say. And I think that the criteria that have been put upon the development of these projects is sufficient now to prevent what happened in the past. And I agree. And it's, as much as Jen hit right on it, I think all those files and everything that had to do with the redevelopment authority and its history were put into a pit, a bottomless pit, and strewn about in such a way they could never be reconstructed. Thank goodness she had the fortitude Jen did to put most or some back together, at least to get us a starting point that we can at least show where we came from, and God, we never want to go back there again. So I think it's, if anything we've learned, the positive comes from the pain that we've learned in the past. Hopefully we're not going to repeat it in the future. And I think there's enough strict guidelines on either side of the right path to keep us from doing that. So let's take it from there.
You know, what you mentioned the chairman of the redevelopment, who was chairman of the redevelopment authority. That led people to believe that there was neighborhood participation. That was part of the problem.
Yes.
That was a ruse.
Part of the problem. When they saw somebody they were familiar with, they thought that, oh, okay, then we're going to be represented.
I heard that, Joe, from property owners, folks of Cape Verdean descent said that. Yeah.
And African American. His family lived right on Mill Street, you know?
Yeah.
One of the first houses to be taken.
Relocated his mom twice.
Yeah, how about that, huh? Higher and higher.
Trish Andre thinks that further discussion will be helpful, and I think maybe next time we'll invite Trish to be on the panel. What do you say, Trish? Sounds like a good thing.
I think that's a great idea.
Hey, folks, I think we're going to say goodnight. We've been talking for an hour, and our facilities staff is getting ready to close up. So I'm going to escort Eugene Montero and Bill DeCarmo out the front door of the museum. And
Hi, Gene.
Hi, Jean. Thank you. What a treat, Mike. Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for coming out and talking. And I think we probably ought to do it again sometime. After we mulled this over a little bit and thought about it a little bit more.
And I'll have to get a stand, huh? Now that I'm doing this, I'll have to get a stand for my iPad. I have to become a pro, huh?
Thanks, everyone.
you know how abrupt the ending is of a Zoom meeting, right? It's like you hit the lead, you know, you hit it and it's like it's all gone and everybody is sort of like, wow, what just happened? So so I think that we're gonna say goodnight. We're gonna thank Jocelyn Nunes.
Yes.
Who's you know,
Very nice.
she does a fabulous job setting these Zooms up. So thanks, Jocelyn. You're a real pro. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out tonight and for chatting and making the trip from Marion, Bill, and Jean.
Thank you.
We'll say goodnight.
Well done.
Good
Good
night.
Good
night.
night.
Be well,
Good
my
night,
friends. Yes, talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night, friends. All of you.
Good night.